The stars died here long ago, leaving only tombstones of light. Ilara Vance watched the stellar graveyard drift past the command deck's viewport. She was a diplomat, not an explorer. Yet she commanded the Accord survey vessel Pathfinder. Her appointment was a quiet exile, a punishment for a treaty negotiation that had gone too well for the wrong party. Now her domain was the Tartarus Nebula, a place where dying suns painted the cosmos in hues of rust and sorrow. Her mission was to chart anomalies, a task given to has-beens and hopefuls. Vance knew which she was. The ship hummed around her, a low thrum of barely contained power that did little to soothe the cold knot in her stomach. They were hunting a ghost, a strange energy signature on the edge of Accord space that mimicked ancient human fusion drives, but on an impossible scale. For weeks, the anomaly had been a whisper on their long-range sensors, a flicker in the dark. Now they were upon it. A faint geometric sigil had ghosted across their screens moments before an image of a perfect circle bisected by a balanced scale. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, dismissed by the ship's AI as a sensor flare. But Vance saw it, a premonition etched in light. Kalen, their lead systems analyst, had called it a resonance echo, a footprint left by something immense that had passed through, or perhaps had never left. He believed they were chasing a relic of the first expansion, a period of human history shrouded in myth and fury. Vance just wanted to file a report and turn for home. Her career was already a ghost. She had no desire to chase another. The stakes were simple: find something, file the report, and maybe earn a slightly less remote post next cycle. Fail, and she would be forgotten entirely. The ship itself was a dormant titan, a colossal vessel of unknown design resting in the skeletal arms of a shattered Dyson swarm. Its hull was a mosaic of obsidian and silver, absorbing the faint light of the distant nebula. It did not register on any mass detectors, yet its gravitational influence was undeniable, bending starlight around its silent form. It was a contradiction given physical form, a warship built like a cathedral. The silence from the relic was the most unnerving part. No distress call, no automated warnings, no energy output, just a deep, subharmonic hum that vibrated through the Pathfinder's own frame, a soft note of slumbering power. They came seeking a ghost and found a god sleeping in its tomb. The obsidian anchorage, the wreckers called this place, but it felt more like a shrine. Status Nexus, Vance said, her voice cutting through the quiet tension of the bridge. The ship's AI responded instantly, its synthesized voice calm and devoid of inflection. Hull integrity of the Anomaly is nominal, Commander. No breaches detected. We are holding station at the recommended 500,000 kilometers. Scans show zero energy emissions, yet the gravitational distortion remains. It is a physical impossibility. Yorick, the Pathfinder's tactical officer, shifted his weight. He was a man carved from asteroid iron, a veteran of the pirate wars who saw threats in every shadow. It's playing dead, he grumbled. His eyes locked on the tactical display. Old marauder trick. Lure you in close, then open up with spinal cannons when you're too deep in the gravity well to escape. The anomaly has been dormant for an estimated 20,000 standard years, Officer Yorick Nexus stated. The probability of it employing marauder tactics is statistically insignificant. Vance appreciated the AI's logic, but Yorick's caution was a welcome anchor in this sea of unknowns. Law was a shield, not a sword, but shields could still break bones. She had spent her life negotiating clauses and sub-clauses, not military engagements. Here, the only laws that seemed to apply were those of physics, and their target was gleefully breaking them. The immense vessel before them was built with a grace that belied its obvious purpose. Its lines were clean, sweeping back from a bow that was less a weapon and more a statement of presence. Along its flanks, sealed emplacements hinted at weapon systems of unimaginable power, yet they were cold, silent, and still. Kalen's voice crackled over the comm from his engineering node. "Commander, I'm seeing something in the hum. It's not just background energy. There are patterns repeating sequences encoded in the low-frequency vibrations. It's structured, almost like language." Before Vance could respond, a proximity alert blared. Red icons blossomed on the tactical display. Yorick was instantly at his station, his hands flying across the control surfaces. "Multiple contacts, Commander. Dropping out of phase shift on our 6. They're broadcasting Koros compact identification codes. Civilian salvage licenses." Vance felt her blood run cold. The Koros Compact was a rapacious consortium that used legal loopholes and overwhelming force to claim rights to anything not nailed down. They were vultures who circled galactic frontiers, picking at the bones of lost colonies and forgotten outposts. They were legalists, not lawkeepers. Their arrival was not a coincidence. It was a predation. She watched as 3 bulky, brutal-looking salvage haulers and a screen of 4 smaller wasp-like corvettes materialized from the shimmering distortion of their phase drives. They were ugly ships built for utility and intimidation. A hail request appeared on her console. On screen, she ordered her voice tight. The face of Administrator Valerius filled the main view screen. He was a man whose smile never reached his eyes, a portrait of corporate avarice. His uniform was immaculate, a stark white against the gray utilitarian bridge of his flagship, the Claim Jumper. Accord vessel Pathfinder, he began, his tone dripping with false cordiality. "Administrator Valerius of the Koros Compact. We have filed a primary salvage claim on the derelict vessel at these coordinates. We ask that you stand down your survey and retreat to a safe distance. This is now a protected commercial operation." Vance stood firm, her diplomatic training kicking in. "Administrator, this is an archaeological site of immense significance. The Accord recognizes no such claim. We are here under a mandate of scientific discovery, not commercial salvage." Valerius chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Your mandate is a request. My claim is a legal filing backed by the Interstellar Salvage Accords, Section 4, Paragraph 3. Any unclaimed derelict vessel outside of sovereign territory is subject to lawful seizure and recovery. This vessel is quite clearly derelict. Now stand aside, Commander, or you will be in violation of established commercial law." A warning was just a threat wrapped in politeness. Vance knew the law. Valerius was technically correct, but his interpretation was a perversion of its intent. The law was meant for abandoned freighters, not for this. This was history. This was a secret humanity had forgotten it even had. "We do not recognize your authority here, Administrator. We are not asking you to," Valerius replied smoothly, his smile tightening. "We are informing you of the facts. You are interfering with a lawful operation. Power down your core systems, or we will be forced to file a complaint of obstruction." The unspoken threat hung in the air. The corvettes were already moving their weapon ports, glowing with latent energy. They were positioning themselves to screen the haulers which were beginning to advance toward the silent relic. Their intent was clear. They were going to carve it up for scrap and secrets. Vance was outgunned and outmaneuvered. Her ship was a science vessel, its armaments purely defensive. The Koros fleet could disable her in minutes. Commander Nexus's voice was a low murmur in her ear. "Analysis of their fleet composition indicates a 92% probability of our defeat in a direct military engagement. Their corvettes are fast attack craft, designed for disabling shields and engines. They're launching drones," Jorik reported, his voice grim. "Heavy-duty cutter drones. They're not waiting for permission. On the screen, a swarm of small insect-like machines detached from the lead hauler. They moved with predatory speed, their plasma torches already igniting in the vacuum. They were heading straight for the ancient ship. Vance felt a surge of protective anger. That vessel had slept for 20,000 years, a silent monument to a forgotten age. It deserved more than to be torn apart by corporate jackals. The past was not a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. She had to make a choice. Uphold the letter of the law and let them proceed, or defend the spirit of it and risk the lives of her crew. Her eyes fell on Kalen's station, where the patterned energy readings from the relic were still scrolling. A structured language. A question. A sudden impossible idea began to form in her mind, a gambit so audacious it defied all logic. It was the move of a diplomat, not a soldier. It was her only move. "Kalen," she said, her voice steady. "You said the hum was structured. Can you isolate the core query? What is it asking?" "It's complex, Commander," he replied, his voice strained with concentration. "It seems to be a repeating sequence of logic proofs, like a legal argument. It's asking for a declaration of intent, a statement of principle. It's testing whoever approaches it." Valerius's drones were closing in. Their torches flared, casting a harsh artificial light on the relic's dark hull. That light seemed to disturb something. The subharmonic hum from the ancient ship deepened a low growl that resonated in the bones of the Pathfinder's crew. It was the sound of a giant stirring in its sleep. The universe does not care for legal documents. It cares for action. Nexus's Vance commanded her decision made. Open a wide-beam channel to the relic. Kalen, feed the pattern back on itself, but insert our response. Use the Accord's founding charter. Broadcast the entire legal framework for first contact protocols, the articles on the preservation of sentient history, the laws governing stewardship over pre-sentient artifacts. Commander Nexus interjected, "That is a massive data packet. It will require diverting power from shields. It is also an illogical course of action. The vessel is inanimate." "Do it," Vance snapped. Jorik looked at her, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes, but he held his tongue. He saw the resolve in her face. This was her battlefield now. The drones reached the hull. The first plasma torch made contact, and a shower of incandescent sparks erupted into the void. The moment it did, the hum from the relic ceased. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the system. Then a new light began to glow along the ship's spine, a soft silver luminescence that pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm. A heart was beginning to beat. The drones recoiled as a wave of energy, harmless but immense, washed over them. Their systems shorted, their torches extinguished. They drifted suddenly inert. On the Koros flagship, Valerius stared at his screen, his smug demeanor evaporating. The silver light on the relic's hull intensified, tracing the lines of the sigil Vance had seen earlier. The scales of justice within a perfect circle. It pulsed once, twice, and then a calm, powerful voice filled the comm channels of every ship in the system. It was not a single voice, but a chorus of thousands speaking in perfect unison. "A plea has been entered," the voice declared. "A claim has been made upon the derelict. The court is now in session. We are the Argent. State your case." The bridge of the Pathfinder was frozen in stunned silence. Vance felt a tremor run through her, a mixture of terror and awe. She had gambled that the ship was not a prize to be won, but a judge to be persuaded. She had been right. The sleeping Titan was not a warrior. It was an arbiter. She had knocked on the door of the courthouse, and the courthouse had answered. Now she had to argue her case before a power that had slumbered since the dawn of human expansion. Valerius recovered first, his greed overriding his shock. "Unknown vessel," he broadcast, his voice straining to sound authoritative. "You are in violation of compact salvage territory. Identify yourself and your purpose, or you will be dismantled as a navigational hazard. The Argent did not respond to him directly. Its voice addressed the system at large. The first plea entered by the vessel Pathfinder cites Accord Stewardship Protocol 7. It posits that the subject designated Argent is a historical artifact of significant cultural value warranting preservation over commercial exploitation. It is a plea for guardianship. The silver light on its hull pulsed gently. The second plea entered by the vessel Claim Jumper cites Interstellar Salvage Accords Section 4. It posits that the subject Argent is abandoned property warranting lawful seizure and commercial recovery. It is a plea for ownership. A new light kindled on the Argent's bow, a piercing white beam that lanced out to scan the Pathfinder, then the Koros fleet. It was not a weapon. It felt analytical. We require evidence to support these conflicting claims. The charge is stewardship. The countercharge is acquisition. The burden of proof rests upon the claimants. You will be measured. A judgment was not a guess. It was a calculation. Vance watched as the beam swept over her ship. She felt its touch, not as heat or energy, but as a deep, intrusive scan of their data cores. It was reading them. It was reading their history, their logs, their laws, their very intent. A civilian vignette played out on a lower deck. A young hydroponics technician tending to a row of flowering lunar roses paused as the ship's lights flickered. She looked at the delicate petals, a small piece of home, so far from it, and whispered a quiet hope that she would see real sunlight again. The Argent's beam passed over them, and in that moment, Vance knew it saw that technician, that flower, that hope. It was weighing their soul. Then the beam moved to the Koros fleet. Valerius, realizing what was happening, barked an order. Firewalls up, encrypt the manifests. Don't let it see our ledgers. But it was too late. The beam cut through their pathetic digital defenses as if they were nothing. A new voice joined the chorus of the Argent, this one colder, sharper. We find discrepancies. The plea cites lawful salvage. The evidence shows a history of asset stripping, hostile acquisition, and the dissolution of protected colony charters. The plea cites commercial recovery. The evidence shows manifests of plundered artifacts sold to private collectors in violation of heritage laws. The white light on the Argent shifted its hue, taking on a hard, icy edge. The scales of justice had begun to tip. This is an illegal intrusion, Valerius howled, his composure shattered. Our records are private. Fire a warning shot. Show them we mean business. One of the Koros corvettes obeyed. A bolt of plasma energy, bright and angry, shot across the void. It was not aimed to hit, but to intimidate. It streaked past the Argent's bow. The ancient vessel did not move. It did not raise shields. It simply observed. The plasma bolt flew past and dissipated into the nebula. And then the Argent spoke again, its voice losing all trace of its earlier neutrality. It was now the voice of cold, unyielding judgment. The plea for ownership has been amended by an act of aggression. This is noted in the ledger. The plea for stewardship stands. We will now render a preliminary injunction. Koros Compact Fleet, you will cease all operations. You will withdraw your claim. You will retreat from this system and not return. This is your first and only warning. Compliance is not optional. For a moment, it seemed Valerius might actually obey. His face was pale, his bravado gone. But then his greed, the core of his entire being, reasserted itself. He saw a prize of unimaginable value, a ship that could reshape interstellar law and commerce. He would not be cowed by a ghost and its empty threats. The greedy man sees the world as a feast and himself as the only guest. All ships, he snarled, his voice a venomous hiss across the channel. Target that relic. I want its drives, its core, its voice. I want it silenced. Open fire. The Koros fleet unleashed a barrage of plasma cannons and kinetic slugs. It was a storm of raw destructive energy, a temper tantrum on a cosmic scale. The space between them and the Argent lit up with a blinding fusillade. Yorick instinctively braced for impact, his hand moving to the shield controls. But Vance held up a hand. She was watching the Argent. It remained dark, impassive, accepting the storm. It still had no shields. It did not need them. As the first volley of weapons fire crossed a specific invisible line in space, it simply vanished. Not blocked, not absorbed. It ceased to exist. One moment, a torrent of deadly energy was hurtling toward the Argent. The next, there was only the silent void. Valerius stared dumbfounded. He had fired his sword and hit a hole in the universe. The Argent's voice returned, and now it carried the weight of 1,000 collapsing stars. The plea for ownership has been withdrawn by an act of unprovoked violence. The charge is now piracy. The evidence is the act itself. The verdict is rendered. The sentence will now be carried out. The obsidian hull of the ancient ship came alive. Not with weapons, but with light. Thousands of lines of silver energy traced a complex, impossibly vast circuit across its surface. The Dyson swarm fragments around them, the dead skeletal remains of the system's builders, began to resonate. They glowed with a faint, borrowed light. The Argent was not just a ship. It was the key to the entire system. It was not a sword. It was the hand that wielded the entire armory. What is it doing? Jorik breathed, his tactical display a mess of incomprehensible energy readings. It is mirroring their energy expenditure. Nexus stated, its voice for the first time tinged with something that sounded like awe. And it is writing the debt to a new ledger. It is enforcing a contract they did not know they had signed. On the Koros flagship, alarms blared. Valerius's chief engineer screamed over their internal comm. Sir, our power cores are fluctuating. Something is drawing energy directly from our fusion plants. We're being drained. The Argent spoke one last time, its judgment echoing across the system. You have made a withdrawal from the bank of violence. The debt must now be repaid. With interest, the silver lines on its hull flared. The entire Dyson swarm pulsed in unison, a vast network of ancient, repurposed technology. The energy that the Koros fleet had expended was not gone. It had been captured, measured, and stored. Now it was being returned. Not as a weapon blast, but as a precise surgical application of cosmic law. The engines of the Koros corvettes sputtered and died, their power cells instantly and completely drained. Their lights flickered and went out. The larger haulers suffered the same fate. Their systems failed in a cascade of dying sparks. An entire fleet, armed and dangerous moments before, was now cold, dark, and adrift. A debt of energy was repaid in silence. They were not destroyed. They were simply foreclosed upon. Their power was forfeit. Their ability to act, to threaten to exist as anything more than helpless metal coffins, was erased. It was a perfect, bloodless victory. It was the enforcement of a verdict. Vance watched her heart pounding in her chest. She had come to the edge of the void, seeking a footnote for her career. She had found the living embodiment of the law itself, a power that did not need to break its enemies because it could simply unmake them with the weight of their own transgressions. Nexus, she said, her voice barely a whisper. What just happened? The AI paused for a long moment. Commander, the relic has turned the fundamental principles of thermodynamics into a punitive legal instrument. It balanced the equation. do not have a framework to properly categorize this action. From Kalen's station, a single breathless word cut through the silence. Beautiful. On the main screen, the single red light of Valerius's active comm channel was the only sign of life from the disabled fleet. He was saying nothing. He was simply broadcasting his own terrified, ragged breathing into the void. He had tried to seize a relic and had been repossessed by it. Justice is not always blind. Sometimes it sees everything. Vance took a deep breath, the recycled air of the Pathfinder tasting cleaner, sharper than before. She had faced down a predator and won not with cannons but with a better argument. She looked at the majestic form of the Argent, its silver sigil now glowing with a steady, permanent light. Her quiet exile had just ended. A new, far heavier responsibility had just begun. She was no longer just a diplomat. She was now the advocate for a client that was 20,000 years old and held the power to rewrite the laws of physics. As they began to interface more deeply with the awakened ship, Kalen made a discovery that sent a chill down her spine. He was mapping its internal systems, trying to understand the source of its incredible power. He found vast archives, data cores that contained not just legal precedent, but history. The complete unredacted history of the first expansion. The triumphs, the tragedies, and the terrible secrets that had led to its fall. It was the greatest treasure trove of knowledge ever discovered, but it was the architecture of the systems that truly captivated him. "It's like nothing I've ever seen, Commander," he reported, his face alight with a feverish intellectual passion. "Its memory systems are structured as immutable ledgers. Every event is recorded, balanced, and accounted for. Every action has a counteraction. It doesn't just store data, it weighs it." He paused, looking up from his console, a look of profound realization on his face. That's its secret. It teaches by numbers, and it remembers by ledgers. There are no collars here, only accounts. It remembered every debt, and it always came to collect. The statement hung in the air, defining the nature of the entity they had awoken. It was not a machine of control, of dominance. It did not use force to compel obedience as so many empires did. It operated on a far more fundamental principle, cosmic accountability. Every transaction, whether of energy, matter, or intent, was recorded. Every debt was tracked, and sooner or later every account was settled. This was not a warship. It was a divine accountant, a saint of universal law. Their communion with the Argent was interrupted by a new alert. A single, powerful energy signature was approaching the system at high speed. It wasn't Koros. The signal was clean, broadcasting an old, almost forgotten human military code. It was a ghost from an even deeper past, a signal that hadn't been used in centuries. Yorick's hands flew over the tactical board. "Commander, I've got a positive ID." "It's impossible." "It's an old hegemony battlecruiser. The Iron Resolve. That ship was reported lost with all hands during the Outer Rim collapse. The Iron Resolve was a legend, a vessel from a time when humanity was more fractured, more warlike. It represented an era of military doctrine that the Accord had been formed to prevent from ever rising again. It was a predator of a different kind, one that believed might made right, and that order was something to be imposed at the barrel of a gun. For every law, there is someone who believes they are above it. A harsh, gravelly voice crackled over the comm, ignoring all pleasantries and protocols. "This is Grand Marshal Thorne of the Hegemony Restoration Fleet. We have tracked a unique power signature to this location. The asset you have activated is a weapon of the old Imperium. By the authority of the Crimson Mandate, it is now under my command. Stand down and prepare to be boarded, Pathfinder. You are in the presence of your betters." The new arrival was a monster of a ship, a jagged beast of gunmetal gray, bristling with macro cannons and missile pods. It made the Koros fleet look like pleasure yachts. Where the Argent was a cathedral, the Iron Resolve was a fortress built for a single brutal purpose: absolute dominance. Vance felt a different kind of fear now. Valerius was a businessman who used force. Thorn was a zealot who believed force was the only answer. He wouldn't be reasoned with. He wouldn't be intimidated. He saw the Argent not as a judge, but as the ultimate weapon, a prize to be claimed for his crusade. Nexus, Vance said, her voice low. Compare their military strength to ours. The Iron Resolve is a relic, but a fully armed and operational one, Commander, the AI replied. It outmatches the Pathfinder by a factor of 12. It outmatches the combined Koros fleet by a factor of 7. In a direct conflict, our probability of survival is less than 1%. Thorn was not waiting for a reply. The Iron Resolve was already launching boarding craft armored shuttles designed to punch through a ship's hull. His plan was clear: take the Pathfinder, seize its crew, and force them to relinquish control of the Argent. He was a man of action, not words. A bully's only argument is his fist. But he had made a critical error in judgment. He assumed he was dealing with the crew of the Pathfinder. He was not. He was dealing with the court. The Argent stirred. Its voice, calm and impossibly vast, filled the comms once more. A new plea has been entered. A claim of sovereign inheritance has been made by the vessel Iron Resolve. The plea cites the authority of a crimson mandate. We do not recognize this authority. We do not recognize this claim. The light on the Argent's bow, the analytical beam, lanced out and swept over the approaching battlecruiser. Thorn, unlike Valerius, did not even bother with firewalls. He seemed to welcome the scan, as if he were proud of the bloody history written in his ship's logs. "Read our history machine," he snarled over the open channel. "Read the glory of the hegemony. Read of the order we brought to a chaotic galaxy. We are the rightful heirs to humanity's power. You belong to us." The scan completed. The Argent fell silent for a long, tense moment. The hegemony boarding craft closed the distance, their engines burning hot. Vance's crew watched their screens, their knuckles white. They were helpless, caught between two titans of bygone eras. One represented a future of law and reason. The other, a past of blood and iron. The future is always at war with the ghosts of the past. When the Argent spoke again, its voice was laced with an emotion that Vance could only describe as sorrow. "We have read your ledger, Grand Marshal Thorn. It is a document written in the blood of subjugated worlds. It speaks of order, but its methods are those of tyranny. You claim inheritance, but you have forsaken the principles upon which your authority was first built. The hegemony you serve is a shadow, a perversion of its founding charter." A low hum began to build from the Dyson swarm fragments, deeper and more powerful than before. The Argent was not just balancing an energy ledger this time. It was accessing something else, something deeper. "The Crimson Mandate is hereby declared null," the voice continued, its power growing with every word. "It is an illegal contract signed under duress and enforced by violence. It has no standing in this court. Your plea is rejected." Thorn laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Your court is a joke. My cannons are the only law that matters out here." "Boarding teams, proceed. You misunderstand." The Argent replied, its voice now resonating with the power of the star system itself. "Your plea was not merely rejected. A counterplea has been filed on behalf of the countless souls recorded in your ledgers. The charge is mass violation of the Sentient Rights Concordance. The evidence is your own ship's logs." The hum intensified, and the space around the Iron Resolve began to shimmer, to warp. It was not preparing an attack. It was preparing a revelation. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Thorn's smug expression faltered as his own ship began to betray him. The lights on his command console flickered. The faces of his ancestors displayed in grand hollow portraits around his bridge dissolved into static. They were replaced by other faces, the faces of the victims of his conquests, the desperate eyes of colonial leaders surrendering under duress, the terrified faces of families being forcibly relocated, the grim, defiant stares of rebels facing summary execution. His ship's archives, the repository of his glorious history, were being turned against him. His ledger was being read aloud for all to see. "What is this witchcraft?" he roared, slamming his fist on his console. "It is not witchcraft." The Argent's voice echoed, seeming to come from the very walls of Thorn's own ship. "It is an accounting. You wished for us to read your history. We have. Now you will read it too. You will bear witness to the cost of your glory." The shimmering around the iron resolve intensified, and then the massive battlecruiser simply vanished. It did not explode. It did not flee. It was just gone. Yorick stared at his tactical screen, which now showed an empty patch of space where the warship had been. Where did it go? Vance looked at the calm, glowing form of the Argent. She knew. It didn't go anywhere. The Argent didn't banish it. It trapped it. Nexus confirmed her suspicion. "Commander, I am detecting a localized, self-contained temporal distortion at the last known coordinates of the Iron Resolve. The ship appears to be locked in a repeating microsecond loop. Inside that loop, its crew is being forced to experience the totality of their ship's historical logs from the perspective of their victims. The loop will persist until the debt is understood. They had not been destroyed. They had been sentenced. Sentenced to empathy. Sentenced to witness the truth of their own actions, to feel the pain they had inflicted, until they finally comprehended the law they had so arrogantly dismissed. It was a punishment of perfect, poetic justice, a prison made of truth. A reckoning cannot be outrun when it lives inside your own mind." In the aftermath, a profound quiet settled over the obsidian anchorage. The disabled Koros fleet drifted helplessly. The ghost of the hegemony was trapped in its own personal hell. The Pathfinder floated alone before the awakened arbiter. Vance felt the weight of the moment press down on her. They had survived, but the game had changed. The existence of the Argent was no longer a secret. It was a galactic precedent waiting to be set. Whoever allied with it would hold the moral and perhaps the physical high ground in any conflict. The Accord needed this, not as a weapon, but as a guide. A compass to remind them that the law was not just a tool for control, but a mechanism for justice. Vance knew what she had to do. Her old life was gone. Her exile was over. She was no longer Alara Vance, disgraced diplomat. She was the first petitioner to the court of the Argent, the steward of its reawakening. Her fight was just beginning. She had to bring this truth back to the Accord, to convince a cynical and bureaucratic government to embrace a power it could not possibly comprehend or control. She had to teach them what she had just learned, that true power was not the ability to destroy your enemies. It was the ability to make them face their own ledger. She opened a channel not to the Accord High Command, but to the legal archives, to the universities, to the historians. "This is Commander Alara Vance of the Accord Survey Vessel Pathfinder." She began, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity and purpose. "I am transmitting from the Tartarus Nebula. I have a discovery to report. A new chapter of human history is about to be written, and it will be adjudicated." A civilian engineer on the Pathfinder, listening to the ship-wide broadcast of the commander's words, looked at the schematics of the Argent that Kalen had managed to map. He saw the flow of power, the logic of its systems, the elegant, undeniable mathematics of its judgments. He saw a machine that did not conquer, but convinced. He saw a future built not on force but on proof. He picked up his data slate and began to write not an engineering report, but a message to his children telling them that he had seen a starship that held the universe to its word. Vance turned her attention to the silent Koros fleet. Their lives were in her hands. She could leave them to rot a just punishment for their piracy. Or she could offer them a choice, a chance to appeal their sentence. She conferred with the Argent not with words, but with an exchange of pure legal concept. The arbiter's response was swift and clear. The law must always provide a path to redemption, however narrow. The purpose of law is not to punish, but to correct. She instructed Nexus to send a message to the derelict ships. The message was simple. It contained the complete energy and life support readings of their vessels, showing them exactly how long they had until their air ran out. And it contained a single legal document, a blank standard accord application for protected transport of prisoners to be signed by their captains. They could sign it, accept their status as criminals awaiting trial, and be towed back to Accord space. Or they could refuse and be left to the void. Their fate was their own choice, a signature for a life, a contract of surrender. Valerius, his face a mask of weary defeat, was the first to sign. One by one, the other captains followed. They chose life, even a life in chains, over the cold, silent alternative. Their plea had changed from ownership to violence, to finally a plea for mercy. And the court, in its infinite and impartial wisdom, had granted it. The victory was total, not because the enemy was destroyed, but because the enemy had been made to bow to the very laws they sought to subvert. With the Koros situation stabilized, Vance turned her focus inward. She now commanded the Pathfinder, but she was also in a partnership with the Argent. She needed to understand its full capabilities, its history, its purpose. Kalen was already deep in the archives, his mind alight with the secrets of the first expansion. He found star charts of unknown galaxies, schematics for technologies that defied known physics and philosophical texts that debated the very nature of justice and existence. It was a library of Alexandria on a cosmic scale. But every book of secrets has a chapter that is dangerous to read. Vance requested access to the Argent's own logs, its own history. The Arbiter granted it. She found herself scrolling through millennia of slumber, but before that, a flurry of activity. The last entries were chilling. They spoke of a threat, a logical fallacy made manifest, a force that did not operate on principles of law or reason, but on pure entropic chaos, a debt that could not be repaid. The Argent had not been abandoned. It had been placed here in this stellar graveyard as a sentinel, a final bulwark against an enemy that had consumed the first expansion. The last log entry dated 20,000 years ago was not a report. It was a judgment, a stay of execution. The anomaly is unquantifiable, the final entry read. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be judged. It can only be contained. We have enacted the final protocol. The obsidian anchorage is now a lock. We are the key. We will sleep until a plea is entered that proves the galaxy is once more worthy of the law. Until then, let the silence hold. Vance realized the terrible truth. They had not just awakened a judge. They had woken a warden. And by waking the warden, they may have just alerted the prisoner. A new cold dread settled over her. The conflicts with Koros and the hegemony were petty squabbles. They had been tests, yes, but they were the preliminary questions on an examination whose final answer could determine the fate of the entire galaxy. The greatest threat is not the enemy you see, but the one you have unwittingly unleashed. Her ship, her crew, and her ancient powerful partner were now on the front line of a war they did not know existed. The Tartarus Nebula was no longer a remote graveyard. It was the edge of a prison yard. and the gate was now open. A plan began to form in Vance's mind, a desperate gambit born of her diplomatic training and her newfound understanding of the Argent's power. They could not fight this new threat with weapons. They had to fight it with precedent. They had to build a coalition, an alliance of worlds so strong, so unified, under the principles of law, that the Argent represented that they could withstand the coming storm. They needed to turn the Accord from a ponderous bureaucracy into a shield for civilization. And she, the exiled diplomat, would be the one to lead the charge with a 20,000-year-old arbiter as her primary witness. The obsidian anchorage was about to become the center of the galaxy. The first order of business was the messy reality of their victory. The Koros fleet floated dead in the water, a flotilla of ghost ships. Their crews were alive, sustained by emergency power, but they were prisoners in their own vessels. Vance supervised as the Pathfinder's single utility shuttle began the slow process of transferring the senior Koros officers to her ship's brig. It was a tedious, methodical task, a stark contrast to the cosmic drama that had just unfolded. Yorick oversaw the security details, his face a grim mask of professional satisfaction. He treated the captured salvagers with a cold, correct protocol, affording them the rights of prisoners, nothing more, nothing less. This was his element, the clear, unambiguous aftermath of a conflict won. Vance, however, felt the weight of the precedent she was setting with every transfer. Her handling of the Koros pirates would be the first entry in her new ledger as steward. To be harsh would be to mimic Thorn. To be lenient would be to invite contempt. She chose the path of the law, the one the Argent itself had shown her. She offered them a clear binary choice, formal surrender and trial, or the slow, indifferent judgment of the void. Their signatures on the digital surrender documents were her first exhibit. True authority was not given. It was earned through just action. Their core systems are completely inert, Kalen reported from his station, his analysis of the disabled fleet ongoing. The Argent didn't just drain them, it balanced them. The fusion cores are stable but locked in a perfect zero state. The energy isn't gone. It's just held in abeyance. It's the most elegant act of disarmament I've ever seen. It's like their ships have been placed in escrow. Can we restart them? Vance asked. Only if the Argent releases the lock, Kalen replied. The debt on their account is still outstanding. Until it's paid, their power is forfeit. He shook his head in wonder. They tried to rob a bank and the bank foreclosed on their souls. The process of securing the prisoners was slow, giving Vance time to think, to truly process the magnitude of her discovery. The Accord was a sprawling, labyrinthine bureaucracy, slow to move and resistant to change. She imagined the emergency council session her message would trigger. The admirals would see a weapon. The lawyers would see a challenge to their entire legal framework. The politicians would see a threat to the delicate balance of power. They would not see what she saw: a chance for renewal, a return to the foundational principles the Accord was supposed to champion. A mirror held up to a tired civilization shows every flaw. Her message needed to be perfect. It had to be a legal brief, a scientific report, and a political manifesto all in one. She began to compose it with Nexus providing data and Kalen offering insights gleaned from the Argent's archives. The core of her argument was simple. The Argent was not a tool to be wielded, but a teacher to be consulted. It was not a weapon of war, but an instrument of peace, one that enforced peace through the unassailable logic of consequence. She attached the complete sensor logs of the encounters, with both the Koros fleet and the Iron Resolve. The data was irrefutable. It showed two overwhelming threats neutralized without a single casualty on either side. It was a record of perfect, undeniable victory. As she finalized the message, A junior astrogation officer on the lower deck plotted the course for the long journey back to the nearest Accord outpost. She traced the lines on her screen, a path through the familiar stars of home. But looking out her small viewport at the silent, majestic form of the Argent, she felt a strange reluctance to leave. She had spent her life learning the fixed laws of celestial mechanics, the predictable dance of planets and stars. Now she had seen a power that could impose a new set of laws on reality itself. She felt like a student who had just discovered a whole new branch of mathematics, one that could solve for the value of justice. Finally, the message was ready. Nexus, transmit the report to Accord High Command. Priority Alpha, Vance ordered. Encrypt it with my personal command codes. And log a copy in the Argent's primary ledger. Acknowledged, Commander, the AI replied. The entry is logged. Your plea for understanding has been entered into the court's record. Vance allowed herself a small, weary smile. Even Nexus was beginning to adopt the language of the Arbiter. The AI, once a being of pure calculation, was now grappling with a system where logic and morality were the same thing. It was learning just as she was. The most profound lessons are the ones that reshape the learner. The reply from Accord Command was faster than she expected, and it was not a message. It was a fleet. Within 12 hours, a rupture in space-time tore open at the system's edge, a violent, shimmering wound in the fabric of the void. 6 Accord warships emerged sleek and silver, their forms radiating military power and unwavering authority. They were led by a heavy cruiser, the Vigilance, a vessel whose name was a statement of intent. They arranged themselves in a precise, intimidating formation, their weapon ports aglow. They were not here for a discussion. They were here to take control. Their commander was Admiral Kasia Rostova, a woman known for her rigid adherence to protocol and her deep suspicion of anything that fell outside of established doctrine. She was the old guard, personified, a product of the military academy that taught one simple lesson: any power not controlled by the Accord was a threat to the Accord. Her face appeared on Vance's screen, severe and unyielding. Commander Vance, I am Admiral Rostova. I am assuming command of this sector. You will transfer all data pertaining to the artifact designated AG-001 to my flagship. And you will power down your non-essential systems and prepare to be debriefed. You have caused quite a stir, Commander. Vance stood her ground. Her brief tenure as an exile had burned away her fear of authority. Admiral, with all due respect, this is not a salvage site, and that is not an artifact. You are in the presence of a sentient legal entity with sovereign rights under Accord law. I am acting as its chosen counsel. Rostova's eyes narrowed. Your report was imaginative, Commander. But the fact remains, you have activated a weapon of unknown power. Accord military doctrine is clear. It must be secured. It cannot be secured, Vance stated calmly. It can only be petitioned. It does not respond to force. As Grand Marshal Thorne learned to his great cost, the closed fist cannot receive a gift. We are aware of the disappearance of the Iron Resolve. Rostova said, a flicker of something unease perhaps in her eyes. That is precisely why we are here. A power that can erase a battlecruiser is a power that cannot be left in the hands of a disgraced diplomat. Now stand down. That is an order. Before Vance could reply, a new voice filled the comm channel. It was the calm, choral voice of the Argent. A new plea has been entered. The vessel Vigilance, on behalf of the entity Accord, asserts a claim of protective custody. The claim is based on a doctrine of preemptive security. The white analytical beam lanced out from the Argent's bow and swept over the Accord fleet. Rostova's crew watched their military composure cracking as they felt the deep, intrusive scan of their ship's soul. The Argent was reading their intentions, their orders, their fears. Then something new happened. A subtle distortion rippled through the system. It was not a grand, dramatic event. It was a small wrongness. The light from the distant nebula seemed to bend at an incorrect angle. On the Pathfinder's bridge, Kalen's sensor readings flickered, showing impossible numbers. A stray piece of debris from the Dyson swarm, drifting for millennia, suddenly reversed its course, violating the laws of momentum. It was a quiet tear in the fabric of reality. A whisper of chaos can be more terrifying than a shout of war. Nexus's voice cut through the tension, its synthesized tones now strained, fighting against some unseen interference. Commander, I am detecting a logical paradox. Multiple cascading paradoxes. The constants of the universe are fluctuating within a localized field. My core programming is being eroded. The prisoner was awake. It had noticed the warden was no longer sleeping. It was testing the bars of its cage. The anomaly was not a fleet or a weapon. It was a philosophical plague, a disease of unreason. It did not attack with energy, but with impossibility. How could you fight an enemy that could decide gravity no longer applied? How could you shoot at a target that could exist in two places at once? Admiral Rostova saw the same anomalies on her own screens. Her tactical officers were shouting their systems, struggling to make sense of data that defied every known law of physics. Her response was predictable. It was the only response she knew. All ships, she ordered, her voice tight with suppressed alarm. Isolate the source of that distortion, target it, fire. A spread of gravimetric torpedoes, impose order. Admiral Novance yelled, but it was too late. The Accord cruisers unleashed a volley of sophisticated weapons. Gravimetric torpedoes were designed not to explode, but to warp space-time, to crush targets in a bubble of immense gravity. They were the ultimate expression of conventional physical power. The torpedoes sped toward the epicenter of the distortions, and they were consumed. They did not detonate. They simply vanished into the quiet wrongness, and the wrongness grew stronger. The impossible reversal of the debris accelerated. The light of the nebula twisted into a grotesque, mocking spiral. The anomaly fed on their attempt to impose order. It devoured their logic and spat back chaos. It was a fire that burned the very concept of water. The Accord fleet was adrift in a sea of nonsense. Their targeting computers were useless. Their engines sputtered as the laws of thermodynamics flickered in and out of existence. They were powerful warships rendered as helpless as sailing ships in a hurricane. Rostova stared at her screen, her iron certainty shattered. Her weapons were useless. Her authority was meaningless. She was facing an enemy she could not even define, let alone fight. It was then that Vance understood the true nature of the battle. She could not outfight the anomaly. She could not outthink a being that was the embodiment of anti-thought. But she could put it on trial. It was the only thing the Argent was built to do. Kalen Nexus, she commanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic on her bridge. We need a new plan. We are no longer fighting a fleet. We are litigating against reality itself. She turned to her comm. Argent, she said, addressing the ancient ship directly. The anomaly has breached containment. It has not made a plea. It has made a statement. Its statement is chaos. How does the court respond to a defendant who refuses to recognize the court's existence? The arbiter's voice was steady, a point of absolute certainty in a dissolving universe. The court does not require recognition. It requires only action. The anomaly acts. Its actions create a record. The record is its plea entered in absentia. The plea is for the dissolution of all ledgers. The silver sigil on the Argent's hull began to glow with a fierce, determined light. The court denies the plea. We will now present our counter-argument. The hum from the Dyson swarm fragments intensified, but it was different this time. It was not a tool for draining energy or inducing empathy. It was a resonance, a harmonic that sought to reinforce the fundamental laws of the universe. The Argent was not attacking. It was teaching. It was reminding the universe of its own rules. The most powerful truth is the one that needs no defense, only repetition. Admiral Rostova-Vance broadcast to the stunned Accord commander. Power down your weapons. Your attempts to fight are feeding it. This is not a battle for territory. This is a battle for the definition of existence. You need to stand down and let the law take its course. Rostova, her fleet in disarray, her entire worldview crumbling, had no choice. She gave the order. The Accord warships went quiet, their glowing weapon ports fading to black. They floated silent witnesses to a conflict that transcended military science. Argent Vance pressed. What is the counter-argument? What is your gambit? The Anomaly seeks to erase the ledger, the choral voice explained. It creates a debt in the system of reality with every action, but refuses to acknowledge the debt. It is a logical fallacy. To counter a fallacy, you do not attack it. You expose it to its own internal contradiction. The light from the Argent and the Dyson swarm began to coalesce to form a vast, system-wide field of pure, structured information. It was a projection of the Accord's own legal charter, the same one Vance had used earlier, but magnified a billionfold. It was interwoven with the fundamental constants of physics, the speed of light, the charge of an electron, the gravitational constant. It was a legal framework built on the bedrock of reality. It was a contract for existence. It was offering the universe a new set of terms and conditions. We are defining the battlefield, the Argent stated. Within this space, all actions will be recorded, all debts will be tallied. The Anomaly is free to act as it pleases, but it will no longer be able to act without consequence. It will be made to sign the ledger with every violation. A maintenance technician huddled in a service crawl space on the Pathfinder felt the bulkhead beside him vibrate with the deep, resonant hum. He saw the ship's internal lights flicker not with failure, but with a new kind of power. He wasn't a soldier or a lawyer, but he understood what was happening on a gut level. He felt like he was inside a great bell, one that was about to chime with a note so pure and so true that it would shatter every lie in the universe. He braced himself not for an impact, but for a moment of absolute clarity. The Anomaly reacted. It lashed out at the structured field with waves of pure chaos. A squadron of Accord fighters caught in the wave found their component atoms briefly forgetting how to bond. They flickered their forms, becoming translucent, ghostly. But the field held. And every assault, every violation of physical law was now leaving a trace, a scar in the perfect structure of the field. A bright burning line of red appeared in the silver lattice for every impossible act. The Anomaly's ledger was being written against its will. A criminal is defined not by his nature, but by the laws he breaks. But the strain was immense. The fragments of the Dyson swarm glowed cherry red. Pushed to their absolute limits, the silver light of the Argent began to dim its own vast energy reserves being poured into maintaining the legal physical field. Kalen's console screamed with warnings. Commander, the energy expenditure is astronomical. The Argent is burning through 20,000 years of stored power in minutes. It can't maintain this. It doesn't have to maintain it forever, Vance said, her eyes fixed on the growing network of red scars in the silver field. It just has to make its point. Nexus. What is the net result of the Anomaly's actions within the field? Nexus. Its voice, now stabilized by the reinforcing structure of the field, answered immediately. The Anomaly is creating a net deficit in universal causality. The sum of its actions results in a logical impossibility. It is attempting to create a state of being where 2 plus 2 equals 5. Exactly, Vance breathed. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place in her mind. It was a desperate, terrifying legal maneuver. Argent, the defendant, has presented its argument. A universe where 2 plus 2 equals 5. The evidence is the chaos it has created. It is time for the rebuttal. It is time to balance the books. The debt is now quantified. The Argent affirmed, its voice growing fainter as its power waned. The ledger is complete. We will now call the debt. Kalen Vance ordered, prepare to divert the entire power output of the Pathfinder's core into the Argent. We're going to give it the strength to finish this. Commander, that will leave us completely adrift. We'll be helpless. Jorik protested, his tactical instincts screaming at the idea of surrendering all their power. We are already helpless, Jorik Vance replied, her voice soft but firm. Our power is meaningless here. Only its power matters. This was the true meaning of stewardship, to give everything you had in service of a principle. Jorik hesitated for a second, then nodded grimly and began rerouting the ship's energy. The lights on the Pathfinder dimmed, its systems falling silent one by one until only the faintest emergency lighting remained. They were all in a single chip pushed to the center of the table. The surge of power from the Pathfinder flowed into the Argent. The ancient ship's silver light flared brightly one last time. It focused the entire legal physical field, all the silver structure and all the red scars of the Anomaly's transgressions, into a single infinitely dense point. It did not hurl this point at the Anomaly. It placed it within it. It was not a weapon. It was a mirror. A mirror that reflected not light, but logic. The Argent spoke its final judgment, its voice a whisper that carried across the entire system. You have argued for a universe where 2 plus 2 equals 5. The court accepts your premise. Your petition is granted. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the universe screamed. The Anomaly, the embodiment of chaotic, illogical existence, was suddenly bound by its own argument. It had been granted its wish to exist in a reality of its own making, a pocket universe where cause and effect were meaningless, where its own impossible nature was the only law. The field collapsed inward, folding space-time around the Anomaly, trapping it within the prison of its own perfect, illogical freedom. The twisting nebula, the impossible motions, the paradoxes, they all vanished, collapsing into a point of non-existence that was no longer connected to their reality. A liar trapped in a room with only his own lies for company will eventually eat himself. The space where the Anomaly had been was now clean. The laws of physics reasserted themselves with a silent, emphatic finality. The light from the nebula straightened. The stars held their proper positions. The universe was whole again. The cost was severe. The Dyson swarm fragments went dark, their borrowed energy spent. The magnificent silver light of the Argent faded completely, its hull returning to the flat, silent obsidian of its slumber. It had spent nearly everything it had to win this conceptual battle. On the Pathfinder, emergency power flickered on, bringing the bridge back to a state of dim, quiet life. They were alive. They had won. Admiral Rostova's face appeared on their screen again. She was pale, her iron composure gone, replaced by a profound, shell-shocked awe. She said nothing for a long moment, simply staring at the now dormant form of the Argent. "Commander Vance," she finally said, her voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance. "Report. What in God's name just happened?" "You witnessed the successful litigation of a hostile ontological entity," Admiral Vance replied, the exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. "You saw a legal argument win a war that your entire fleet could not. The precedent has been set. The Accord has a choice to make. We can continue to rely on the law of the gun, or we can embrace the power of the law itself. The choice was obvious. The evidence was floating all around them. Rostova's warships, designed to project power, had been rendered impotent. Vance's science vessel, by surrendering its power to a higher principle, had saved them all. The old way was finished. A new way had just been proven, not in a treaty hall, but in the heart of a stellar crucible. The future had arrived, and it demanded a new kind of courage. In the days that followed, the Obsidian Anchorage became a hub of activity. Rostova, humbled and converted, became Vance's staunchest ally. Her reports back to Accord Command were not requests for military reinforcement, but pleas for legal scholars, for historians, for philosophers. The Koros prisoners were transferred to the Accord fleet, their derelict ships left as silent monuments to their folly. The system was secured not by a blockade of warships, but by a shared understanding of the sacred ground they now occupied. Vance remained with the Argent. The Arbiter was weakened, its voice silent, but she could feel its presence. It was sleeping again, but it was a different kind of sleep. It was not the sleep of ages, but the quiet, satisfied rest of a judge after a long and difficult case. It had spent its power, but it had established its jurisdiction over reality itself. The Accord Council, faced with Rostova's testimony and the Pathfinder's irrefutable data, had no choice but to act. They passed the Vance precedent, a sweeping piece of legislation that recognized the sovereignty of entities like the Argent, and established a new branch of diplomacy, ontological law. Vance was no longer in exile. She was the architect of a new age. She stood on the bridge of the Pathfinder, looking at the silent Arbiter. Her work was not over. It was just beginning. She had to guide the Accord, to teach them how to petition the court, not just command a fleet. She had to prepare them for the possibility that there were other prisoners, other wardens, other laws waiting to be discovered among the stars. Her life would be spent in the service of this new, vast, and terrifying understanding of the universe. It was a burden, but it was also a privilege. It was her plea, her purpose, her ledger, now and forever. The law is not a weapon. It is a framework. It is the quiet, insistent logic that holds the stars in place and binds us to the consequences of our choices. We can choose to ignore it, to fight it, to believe we are above it. But in the end, the ledger is always balanced. The universe is a court, and its memory is absolute. On the hull of the ancient ship, deep in the stellar graveyard, a single line of silver light flickered to life, tracing the perfect balanced scales of its sigil. All debts will be paid.